Good evening, everyone. This is amber.vonharten, Council staff, and thanks for joining us this evening to talk about the draft vision blueprint for the snapper grouper fishery. We'll be talking tonight about the management strategic goal. And before we get started, just a few housekeeping items to let you know how the webinar will be run. We will be going through the presentation and going through all the different goals, objectives, strategies, and action items that are being proposed in the document. And then I'll give you some more information about the timeline for the whole overall visioning project, and then also tell you about some other opportunities that you will have to publicly provide some input, including some written comment opportunities. So then we'll open it back up to open discussion, and right now everyone is muted. So when we open up for discussion, if you can just raise your hand using the hand icon that's located next to your name on the webinar dialog box. Just click on the hand icon and we'll know that you have a question or you want to have some discussion, and we'll unmute you and you can ask your question. If for some reason you don't have a mic on your computer or you're calling in from a cell phone or something like that, you can also type your questions into the questions dialog box, which is also on the webinar panel, and we can see that you've typed a question, and then we'll read it out loud and get your question answered or have any discussion that you may want to have. So with that, we will get started here. So just a little bit of background about the visioning project. Hopefully everyone that's on the webinar tonight is a little bit familiar with what's been going on with this project. This project was started back in December of 2012 when the council had been hearing from stakeholders about their frustration with how the fishery was being managed and looking for ideas and ways to improve management of the fishery. So the council decided to embark on this visioning project to come up with this long-term plan for how to manage the snapper grouper fishery. So they decided pretty early on that they would just focus on the snapper grouper fishery for this visioning project, and the overall outcome would be a long-term plan that would develop a vision statement and specific goals, objectives, and potential actions that the council could take to help manage the fishery into the future. The kind of cornerstone of this project has been the public involvement throughout the entire process. There's been ample opportunity for the public to participate and help crafting how this draft vision blueprint will look, and that's why we're having these additional public input meetings now that we have these draft documents available, so that we can fine-tune it and figure out exactly what people support in the visioning project and why, and then also what they do not support in the strategic goals and why. So the draft vision statement reads as: the snapper grouper fishery is a healthy, sustainable fishery that balances and optimizes benefits for all. So just an update on the project timeline to date. As I mentioned, the council really wanted to get stakeholder input throughout the entire process and chose to tackle that by having port meetings in 26 different communities throughout the entire South Atlantic region, from North Carolina all the way down to Key West. We had over 370 people participate in those meetings, and those meetings were very informal, unlike our more formal public hearing and scoping meeting process. They were facilitated by staff, and we kind of just sat down with everybody and asked them what was not working with the snapper grouper fishery, and then what were some ideas for how to fix some of those problems that they were seeing in the management of the fishery. And so those ideas kind of developed into 4 main strategic focus areas to craft the draft vision blueprint, and those areas are management, science, communication, and governance. So that's what the draft strategic goal documents are titled as in those 4 focus areas. Council took all of the public input from the port meetings and compiled the information by state as well as by sector, and then used this information to have their council visioning workshop, which was a 2.5-day facilitated workshop here in Charleston, where they talked more specifically about some of the items you see on the screen here, and that included sub-regional management, reporting and data collection, bycatch, access to the fishery, stakeholder engagement, habitat and ecosystems, and allocation. The result of that workshop were the development of these draft vision blueprint documents for management, science, communication, and governance. And so the council started reviewing those at their December 2014 meeting and have been reviewing those and fine-tuning those through June of last month based on the council member input as well as some initial public input we received from stakeholders. So what's in this vision blueprint? Well, like I said, it's the long-term strategic plan that will help guide management actions into the future for the snapper grouper fishery, and it's built around these four focus areas of science, communication, management, and governance. And these documents are all available on our website, as well as these presentations that we're having this week, and also video recordings of these presentations as well will be available. So what is the structure of the blueprint? The blueprint includes all four of those strategic focus areas, and then each goal has objectives, strategies, and actions that will help kind of guide the direction for attaining that overall goal for that strategic focus area. So the management goal has 6 objectives and 21 strategies, and then each strategy has up to 13 individual actions. So that's the details of how to reach that management goal. This is the management goal up on the screen, and it reads, adopt management strategies for the snapper grouper fishery that rebuild and maintain fishery resources, adapt to regional differences in the fishery, and consider the social and economic needs of fishing communities. So we'll get right into the objectives and walk through each objective and the strategies and actions underneath. So the first objective is dealing with sub-regional differences and issues within the fishery, so how to manage on a sub-regional basis. The first strategy is discussing types of quota-based management systems that could be used to manage the fishery. So one idea is species-specific quota-based management, so things like state-by-state management of certain species, state-by-state management of deep water species, and things of that nature. Voluntary sector shares, where a sector is formed by a group of fishermen and they're given a portion of the quota and they're allocated that and they manage that within their sector. That's used up in the New England area in other fisheries. Voluntary community-based quotas, where a community is formed based on a geographic region or a common interest in the fishery and they get an allocation of the quota and manage it on their own. Voluntary individual fishing quotas, or IFQs, and that's where every individual permitted fisherman in the fishery gets their allocation of quota, and that can be based on a lot of different design elements, such as catch history and things like that. And then also the council wanted to make sure that they included a proposed action to have some kind of tool to make sure that the permit holders in the snapper grouper fishery were supportive of any type of quota-based management system before anything was actually developed. The second strategy is talking about some of those design elements needed for quota-based management systems. So looking at different management elements for that, things like allowing the subregion, however the subregion is defined, to set landings limits or openings and closures of fisheries, managing subregions by fishing effort, quota transfer by subregion, using average landings over a certain time period as a system design element, and also developing criteria by species. They also considered looking at management boundaries based on the biogeography of the fishery. The third strategy looks at alternative sub-regional management strategies that are not quota-based. So things like staggering spawning season closures, regulations that are based on designated subregions and not quota, state-by-state regulations by sector, seasonal sub-regional management that's based on fish availability, And then also some type of effort control strategies, such as establishing alternating 2-week windows of fishing periods by subregion. Objective 2 is talking about access to the fishery and allowing consistent access to the fishery for all sectors. And the first strategy is talking about approaches for addressing retention of snapper grouper species. So looking at things like bag limit and trip limit adjustments, things such as step-down approach for either sector. So that's currently being used in the commercial sector for some fisheries. Re-evaluating the grouper aggregate and manage it based on area. Aggregate trip limits for the commercial sector. And also the idea of having a charter boat limit, so like a total boat limit instead of a per person limit for the for hire sector. The next strategy looks at approaches that address the amount of effort in the fishery. The idea has been proposed of possibly implementing and developing a recreational fishing stamp or license. Also limit the fishing days for deep water species. Managing effort and permits in the commercial and for hire sectors. Evaluating the 2-for-1 permit requirement in the commercial sector. Evaluating the use of days at sea for the commercial sector. Determining the overcapitalization in the fishery, so what are the actual profits, how much resource is available, and what is the gap between those two things. And then also looking at exploring options for a privately funded buyout program for the commercial sector. The third strategy looks at approaches that account for the seasonality of the fishery. Some of the options include regional recreational season for deep water species, a timeout period of no fishing for the recreational sector for a portion of the year, split seasons for the commercial sector, which is another strategy that's already being used for vermilion snapper and now gray triggerfish, seasons for co-occurring species and staggering the seasons accordingly, adjusting the seasonal spawning closure for shallow water grouper, and then more specifically shifting the red snapper mini seasons outside of the spawning season. The next strategy looks at approaches that consider flexibility in setting annual catch limits, or ACLs. So some of the draft options include shifting sector allocations within a season, looking at adaptive management strategies for almaco jack and banded rudderfish that would help slowly increase the ACL. Also looking at using multi-year ACLs that use blocks of years to manage the ACL for specific species. Sometimes that's called multi-year catch specifications. And then also ensuring that more data poor species use alternative data poor assessment approaches. And the last strategy under this objective is talking about expanding alternative management approaches to expand access to the fishery. So possibly expanding fisheries for underutilized fisheries, looking at the applicability and developing policies for aquaculture of snapper grouper species, evaluating the use of harvest tags for specific species in the fishery, using depth to set zones for fishing for recreational harvest, and then also considering management measures that would help simplify regulations for all the sectors. Objective 3 is getting at addressing maximizing social and economic opportunity for all the sectors. So the first strategy in this objective is looking at assisting fishery-dependent businesses to be able to operate efficiently and profitably. So considering market availability when making management decisions and predictability in the for-hire business planning portion of their business. Also considering non-traditional stakeholders and their role in the fishery and how they depend on the fishery, so stakeholders like chefs, restaurants, ecotourism operators, marinas, bait and tackle shops. Also considering new entrants to endorsement programs in place, and also considering the value of owner-operators in the fishery when making management decisions. The second strategy looks at approaches that support recreational fishing opportunity as well as trip satisfaction. So looking at effort control strategies such as setting fishing seasons with post-season adjustments, in-season and post-season bag limit adjustments, setting fishing seasons for co-occurring species, and looking at aggregate bag limits. Also looking at the abundance and availability of easily accessible species in the recreational fishery, possibly establishing artificial reefs or special management zones for the recreational sector, looking at species-specific complex permits, and also evaluating the use of establishing a number of fishing days versus bag limits for the recreational sector. And then also developing some type of aggregate daily bag limit for the recreational sector with no size limit. Objective 4 starts to talk about bycatch, reducing and mitigating discards. So the first strategy looks at considering catch limits, seasons, and the biology of the fishery in order to minimize bycatch. So proposed actions are using spawning special management zones, which is something that the Council is actually working on right now with Snapper Grouper Amendment 36. Using time area closures, either by region or for a specific area. Considering a spawning closure for all snapper grouper species that have a low ACL. Setting a fishing season at the beginning of the fishing year with known opening and closing dates. Setting seasons for deep water species and shallow water species by area. And then also considering time area closures for all snapper grouper species, either for the entire region or that are area specific. The second strategy is looking at the impact of depth on bycatch of snapper grouper species. So considering full retention of deep water species when they're caught, a season for deep water species, and then also removing the size limits for deep water species. Also looking at using alternative electronic monitoring methods to help monitor catch composition and location at different depths that are being fished. And then also looking at zone-based management that would be set by depth. The third strategy for bycatch considers the use of size limits to reduce bycatch. So things like reevaluating and modifying size limits on a species-by-species basis, considering no size limits for snapper grouper species, and then using differential size limits by area. The fourth strategy is talking about developing best fishing practices for stakeholders to help avoid bycatch and reduce discard mortality. So really looking at promoting opportunities for research, development, and evaluation of gear and technology that would help reduce bycatch. So things like hook type and the use of those hooks, descending devices, venting, and things of that nature. Also considering gear requirements for things like weak gear or degrading hooks, and then possibly developing an incentive program for avoiding bycatch. There's a type of bycatch avoidance network in the commercial sector out in the Pacific Northwest that helps fishermen communicate bycatch hotspots so they can avoid going to those areas and catching fish that they're not targeting. The fifth strategy is talking about approaches that consider the use of bycatch quotas and allowances. So actions like a bycatch set-aside limit for commercial trips, a bycatch allowance of up to 5% for species with a low ACL, and also the idea of those multi-year catch specifications again. Objective 5 starts to look at the ecosystem and habitat considerations for the fishery. So the first strategy is talking about enhancement of habitat, so considering new habitat using artificial reefs, evaluating the use of artificial reefs as a mechanism to improve fishery production, and then considering artificial reefs that have limited or no fishing allowed. The second strategy discusses biological, economic, and social impacts when developing these types of ecosystem and habitat management approaches. So considering the impacts of human population growth and distribution on habitats, the use of sunset clauses for existing and newly created marine protected areas, and also the possibility of considering no new NPAs in the South Atlantic. The third strategy looks at approaches that support monitoring and enforcement of managed areas. So the idea here is to possibly use alternative electronic monitoring systems or other type of innovative technology such as surveillance buoys or drones to monitor fishing activity in the managed areas for all sectors. And then the fourth strategy is talking about spatial management approaches to protect and conserve ecosystems and habitats. So considering development of managed areas such as marine protected areas or spawning SMZs that allow no harvest of snapper grouper species, considering additional restrictions on the existing managed areas in the South Atlantic, evaluate areas that may be suitable for spawning special management zones, making sure that when the council creates habitat areas of particular concern, that there are established and clear goals for creating those, and possibly creating no anchor zones to protect fragile habitat. And the last objective under the management goal is talking about allocation. So developing management measures that support optimal sector allocations for the snapper grouper fishery. The first strategy looks at considering the mechanisms of designing allocation strategies, so kind of the who, what, how, and social economic considerations for designing allocation. Some of the options include consider separate allocation for the charter and headboat sectors, evaluate the existing sectors and current harvest to help determine allocation strategies, truncating the recreational allocation time series from 2007 onwards due to the economy, looking at time-based approaches for allocation decisions, managing by economic levels, so from a primary, secondary, and tertiary perspective, which would be like the harvesters or the primary, dealers or the secondary, and then any of the supporting industries would be the tertiary. Incorporating fairness and economics as part of the allocation equation. The use of a mutual allocation pool for certain species, so the allocation would be shared between sectors. And then after evaluating all the existing sectors and current harvest, consider options to set multiple ACLs or only one ACL per allocation. Continuing on with this same strategy, also considering setting ACLs and allocations for multiple years, considering individual quotas based on individual allocations or harvest level, and consider revising allocations on a species-by-species basis, making sure that there's a long enough time frame for developing allocations, and also considering allocations by gear type. And the last strategy under this objective is talking about alternative methods for determining allocation shifts and managing allocations. So there's several options here that are being proposed, and they include considering sub-allocation shifts, considering allocation shifts for species not reaching optimal yield, consider a framework for in-season allocation shifts, considering establishing allocations by permit, so each permit holder gets an allocation that fluctuates based on the ACL, examining reallocation for species with low ACLs, considering reallocation for commercially and recreationally important species, and specifying the allocation focus for each sector, so kind of a commercial offshore sector or recreational nearshore sector, and then also examining recreational harvests for species that are not reaching their recreational ACL. And the last few proposed actions include looking at other methods for establishing suballocations, considering increasing bag limits or other measures first before implementing allocations, considering managing for abundance and ease of access of recreational important species, and then also increasing the bag limit if the recreational ACL is not met. So that's all the objective strategies and actions under the management strategic goal. And before we open it up for discussion, I'll just briefly kind of go through the timeline here of the project. And so as you see on the screen here, this table is showing that Council's receiving public input through September. September 1st is the deadline for submitting written comments. You can still contact us by phone if you'd like after that date. We just need to get everything compiled for the September Council meeting, which is where the Council will be reviewing all the public input and taking it to prepare for their Council member visioning workshop, which will be happening in October here in Charleston. That's where they'll take all this public input and determine what items will stay in the vision blueprint and what items could be removed. Then they will also prioritize which action items are short-term action items, things that could be accomplished in the near future, versus long-term action items that would be established and implemented over time. So the staff would then prepare the final vision blueprint between October and December, and then the Council would review the final vision blueprint and approve it in December at their Council meeting. And then the short-term action items that they've established would be developed into a new snapper grouper amendment. All the materials that you've seen tonight, as well as all the strategic goal documents, all the port meeting summaries and state and sector summaries, and all the briefing book materials from every Council member visioning workshop we've had since December 2012 are on our website under the Visioning Project page. And here's the link here on the screen. So there's 4 ways that the public can get involved and give us their input. These live webinars are the first way that you can get involved. Yesterday we had 2 webinars focusing on the science strategic goal. Today this is the second of 2 webinars on management, and then tomorrow we'll have our webinars on communication and governance. Starting next week, we'll have local comment station meetings in each of the states for the next 3 weeks, and I'll go over that in just a minute. You can also submit written comments using our online comment form straight from our website, or you can also mail or fax comments in. And then last, we'll have our regularly scheduled public hearings in August, where we'll have staff on hand at the meetings to talk further with stakeholders about the draft vision blueprint. So again, here's the schedule for the remaining webinars this week, and the registration links are on our website. So we'll be back again tomorrow morning to talk about communication and governance. And then here's the information about the local comment station meetings. The way that these work is the area council members will actually be in person at these meeting locations to talk informally with stakeholders, and then council staff will be online via webinar, chiming into the discussion as well, and also providing a presentation via webinar about the draft vision blueprint. So participants can actually attend the meeting in person, or anyone throughout the entire region can tune in via webinar to hear the discussions that go on. So from starting, all these meetings will start at 6 p.m. So next week, July 13th through the 16th, Monday through Thursday, we'll have meetings in Florida. July 20th and 21st will be in South Carolina. 22nd and 23rd will be in Georgia. And then the 28th through the 30th will be in North Carolina. And if folks want to participate via webinar, they can just go to the Visioning Project page and sign up for the webinars there. This is the draft vision blueprint comment form that's on our website, and I'm going to pull that up for you in just a second. But this is what the comment form looks like. You can just go to the left-hand side of our homepage, click on the Visioning Project page, and a drop-down menu will come down, and it says Draft Vision Blueprint Comment Form. And this is it here, and it allows you to type in just general comments, and then as you scroll down the page, there are 4 tabs, one for each of the strategic goals, and you can click on each one and comment what you are supportive of in each of those goal areas, and then what you are not supportive of and why in each of those goal areas. And then you enter a security code and just hit the submit button, and then that will go directly to us and have it on file. If you want to mail written comments in, you can send them to me, Amber Von Harten, at the council address on the screen, or fax them in as well. And again, I mentioned in August we'll have our regularly scheduled public hearings, and staff will be on hand to discuss the blueprint at these meetings as well. So August 10th will be in North Charleston, South Carolina. August 12th will be in Murrells Inlet, South Carolina. August 13th in Morehead City, North Carolina, August 24th in Brunswick, Georgia, and August 25th in Daytona Beach. And those details of those meeting locations will be available on the public hearing page of our website as it becomes available. And last, if you have any questions about the project or any of the goal documents or the meetings that are coming up, or just want to have an informal discussion, you can contact me at the office here using that number or my email address. And so with that, I'd like to open up